This is today's cyber news for October 9th, 2025. You can also subscribe to the newsletter and view the archive of previous headlines at DailyCyber.news. What happened? A new extortion crew calling itself Crimson Collective is hitting cloud estates, with a focus on Amazon Web Services, AWS. The group blends credential theft, privilege escalation, and bulk exfiltration from S3 buckets. They're threatening code and data leaks and claim access to a GitLab instance tied to Red Hat. Tactics include abusing overpermissive IAM roles and lateral movement through automation credentials. The activity shows how cloud control plane weaknesses quickly lead to data loss. What this means? The business risk is direct: loss of proprietary code, customer records, and sensitive configurations that can enable fraud. Organizations with heavy AWS footprints, CI/CD pipelines, and broad role trust policies are most exposed. For leaders, make cloud identity hygiene and guardrail coverage a Q4 priority with clear KPIs for least privilege and logging. For defenders, tighten IAM role scoping, require MFA for all human and break glass users, and enable S3 object-level logging. Watch for unusual cross-account role chaining and large off-hours S3 transfers. Recommendation: enforce least privilege IAM and S3 bucket policies now. If you can't fully rescope this week, apply service control policies and turn on object-level access logging while you review keys and roles. What happened? 3 prominent ransomware crews, Lockbit's Reemergence, alongside Dragonforce and Qilin, say they'll coordinate infrastructure, initial access, and negotiation playbooks. Shared tooling and victim-shaming tactics could spread faster, reducing downtime between campaigns. Alliances like this raise the chance of multiple extortion attempts against the same target. Early chatter points to shared leak site amplification and brokered credential markets. Expect more rapid pivoting if one crew is blocked. What this means: expect higher attack volume, shorter dwell times, and steeper demands, especially for mid-market firms and public services with legacy VPNs. For leaders, pre-approved decision trees for ransom stances, restoration thresholds, and outside counsel to avoid negotiation by panic. For defenders, harden exposed remote access, validate EDR coverage on domain controllers, and test restore times against double extortion scenarios. Watch for overlapping victim listings and reused ransom notes across brands. Recommendation: run a 48-hour tabletop focused on multi-crew extortion. If tabletop readiness is low, immediately restrict remote access to MFA only, and verify offline backups are restorable. What happened? The Qilin ransomware group says it compromised systems tied to Asahi, the global beverage company, and has posted samples to pressure payment. Reported effects include data theft of internal documents and supplier details, with potential disruption to regional operations. The incident fits a broader pattern of attacks on manufacturers with complex, time-sensitive logistics. Even when production continues, exposure can trigger regulatory and contractual fallout. Recovery often hinges on supplier coordination as much as internal IT. What this means: manufacturers with distributed plants and shared vendor portals face heightened risk from third-party access and flat networks. For leaders, align plant leadership, legal, and procurement on a single incident response playbook that includes supplier notifications. For defenders, segment OT from IT where feasible, rotate credentials for vendor SSO, and monitor file share access baselines. Watch for atypical data pulls from procurement shares and spikes in VPN sessions from unfamiliar ASN ranges. Recommendation: treat this as a third-party risk drill. Validate vendor access controls now. If segmentation will take time, enforce least privilege on shared drives and tighten VPN allow lists. What happened? A coalition of extortion actors styling themselves as scattered Lapsus Hunters claims to be targeting Salesforce tenants and threatening to leak customer exports. The attacks lean on stolen OAuth tokens, misconfigured connected apps, and social engineering of administrators. Because CRM platforms aggregate sales, support, and billing data, even limited access can expose PII and competitive insights. Some victims report exfil attempts that look like routine integrations. The campaign shows how SaaS misconfigurations become business-level incidents. What this means: any organization that treats CRM as out of scope for security reviews is at higher risk, especially with many third-party integrations. For leaders, require a quarterly SaaS risk review with metrics for token hygiene, SSO coverage, and data export controls. For defenders, audit connected apps, revoke unused tokens, enforce IP restrictions, and enable event monitoring for exports and mass deletes. Watch for unexpected data export jobs and new OAuth grants tied to unvetted apps. Recommendation: lock down CRM exports today, enable SSO, only admin access, and revoke stale OAuth tokens. If a full review must wait, place export rate alerts and IP allow listing. What happened? A widespread Microsoft 365 incident degraded access to Teams meetings and delayed mail flow in Exchange Online. Impact varied by region, with intermittent sign-ins and message delivery lag. Post-incident notes suggest a service dependency issue that cascaded across collaboration workloads. Even brief outages ripple into missed meetings, slowed support queues, and delayed approvals. The event highlights concentration risk in enterprise productivity stacks. What this means: organizations relying on a single collaboration suite face operational and reputational friction when outages strike during business hours. For leaders, formalize outage mode operations, alternate chat channels, phone bridges, and decision protocols that don't depend on email. For defenders, ensure status webhook alerts route to on-call and validate conditional access rules don't block fallbacks during incidents. Watch for rising SMTP retry queues and authentication failures against Azure AD. Recommendation: establish a collaboration failover runbook with alternate channels and emergency distribution lists. If you lack redundancy, pre-stage phone bridges and publish outage communications templates. What happened? Redis maintainers shipped fixes for a long-standing weakness in how embedded Lua scripts run, which attackers can abuse to execute arbitrary code. Cloud and container deployments are especially exposed when Redis faces the internet or trusts unvetted clients. The issue involves script invocation paths that bypass expected sandboxing and input validation. Proofs of concept are circulating, and mass scans tend to follow Redis advisories quickly. Many teams overlook Redis as just a cache, even though it often underpins authentication and session flows. What this means: a compromise of Redis can cascade into account takeover, data tampering, and outages. Teams with microservices, continuous integration and delivery, CI/CD, and session storage in Redis are most at risk. For leaders, elevate this from a library patch to a platform risk with owners, deadlines, and verification. For defenders, restrict network exposure, require authentication, and rotate credentials after patching to invalidate any harvested secrets. Watch for unusual script load calls and spikes in config or module usage. Recommendation: patch Redis immediately. If maintenance windows are tight, block external access, enable off, and monitor for script and module anomalies until you can roll updates. What happened? A vulnerability in a widely used Model Context Protocol (MCP) server and plugin combo for Figma tooling could let attackers execute code during routine design-to-dev workflows. The weakness centers on permissive execution paths and unvalidated parameters in local helper services. Because MCP bridges design systems and automation scripts, a poisoned project or template can spread quickly across teams. Researchers are seeing opportunistic probes and cloned repos carrying modified configs. Maintainers have issued patches and guidance. What this means: design and front-end teams that sync plugins from shared repos, plus agencies serving many clients, face the highest exposure. For leaders, treat design tooling as part of the software supply chain and require attestation on shared templates. For defenders, pin plugin versions, review MCP configs, and gate execution behind signed releases and least privilege tokens. Watch for unexpected child processes on design tools and new outbound connections when files are opened. Recommendation: update affected MCP components now. If rollouts lag, disable auto-update on plugins, sandbox execution, and restrict network egress from design machines. What happened? Attackers are actively abusing an authentication bypass flaw in the popular Service Finder WordPress theme to obtain admin privileges. Once inside, they install backdoors, create rogue users, and pivot to credit card skimmers. Bots are scanning broadly, and small businesses with single admin sites are frequent victims. Some hosts report reinfection because backups contain the original backdoor. Theme authors and security vendors have published mitigations and cleanup steps. What this means: small and mid-sized businesses, municipalities, and nonprofits running WordPress without a staging and patch process face the greatest impact: defacement, payment fraud, and SEO poisoning. For leaders, assign clear ownership for website security and require a monthly patch cadence with verification. For defenders, apply the fixed theme version, remove unknown admins, replace core files from known good sources, and change all credentials. Watch for new admin users, modified WP options, and unexpected cron jobs. Recommendation: patch or temporarily disable the vulnerable theme today. If you can't, enforce WAF rules to block exploit patterns and immediately audit admin accounts and cron entries. What happened? A phishing wave branded as FileFix abuses cache-smuggling techniques to deliver malware from seemingly legitimate domains. The trick splits malicious responses across intermediary caches and browsers, slipping payloads past filters. Fortinet-themed emails and lookalike portals are common lures. The result is rapid initial access with low detection by secure web gateways. Operators rotate infrastructure often to avoid takedowns. What this means: enterprises relying on URL reputation alone are vulnerable, especially where remote staff browse without a full tunnel. For leaders, prioritize awareness on urgent security update lures and ensure web controls include content inspection, not just domain allow lists. For defenders, enable strict cache controls on proxies, deploy content disarm for risky file types, and correlate email and web telemetry. Watch for download prompts from odd subpaths and mismatched content type headers. Recommendation: block known lure patterns and enforce deep file inspection. If that's not possible, quarantine update attachments at the mail gateway and require re-download from vetted portals. What happened? Chinese-aligned operators are using a chain that starts with log poisoning and web shells, then leverages the open-source Nezha framework to push Gh0st RAT onto Linux and Windows servers. The approach blends living off the land tactics with commodity implants to stay quiet. Targets include public-facing app servers and appliances with weak logging. Once established, operators exfiltrate configs and credentials for lateral movement. The toolset is modular and easy to swap if signatures appear. What this means: hosting providers, SaaS backends, and enterprises with self-hosted apps face steady risk from quiet persistence and credential theft. For leaders, fund basic hardening, WAF coverage, centralized logs, and rapid patching for internet-exposed apps. For defenders, lock down writable log paths, inspect for web shell artifacts, and monitor for Nezha-like beacons and Gh0st-style command and control traffic. Watch for sudden spikes in tiny POST requests and unexpected outbound connections from web tiers. Recommendation: harden and monitor internet-facing servers now. If patching lags, block suspicious POST patterns at the WAF and hunt for web shells and anomalous beacons. What happened? Researchers tracking the China-linked group Mustang Panda report a fresh round of phishing that installs loaders which abuse legitimate Windows executables to sideload malicious DLLs, dynamic link libraries. Lures reference current events and policy themes to entice NGOs and government staff to open attachments. The chain evades some endpoint defenses by relying on trusted binaries and signed components during the first hops. Once running, the payload establishes persistence and pulls second-stage modules for data theft and command execution. The tactic refresh shows steady iteration rather than brand-new malware. What this means: diplomacy, policy, and nonprofit organizations with low-friction document workflows face elevated exposure. For leaders, raise the bar on document handling for targeted teams, secure viewers, isolation, and staged rollouts of hardening. For defenders, tighten application control for living-off-the-land binaries, block risky sideload directories, and monitor for unsigned DLL loads by signed apps. Watch for new scheduled tasks tied to system utilities and parent-child chains where Office apps spawn system tools. Recommendation: enforce app control and DLL search order protections today. If you can't, isolate high-risk users' document handling in containers and enable alerts for suspicious signed binary DLL loads. What happened? Multiple incidents show adversaries compromising corporate databases without malware, instead abusing built-in administrative features to exfiltrate data and deliver encryption. Entry often begins with stolen credentials, followed by the use of native functions, export utilities, replication, or backup procedures to move data and stage impact. Because the steps mimic normal maintenance, alerts are sparse until large data movements or service disruption. In several cases, attackers also used operating system tools to compress and transmit archives. The approach complicates attribution and recovery. What this means: organizations with powerful DBA accounts, flat network paths, and weak separation of duties are at highest risk. For leaders, insist on governance-named accounts, change approvals for major schema or backup changes, and regular access reviews. For defenders, implement least privilege for database roles, MFA for consoles and jump hosts, and anomaly detection on export and backup activity. Watch for sudden spikes in export jobs, unplanned replication links, and large outbound transfers from database subnets. Recommendation: lock down privileged DB access now and baseline export and backup activity. If controls take time, restrict egress from DB networks and require break glass approvals for bulk operations. What happened? Following claims by an extortion group of stolen customer data, Salesforce confirmed an incident involving a third-party partner, but said core platforms remain operational. Attackers threatened to leak alleged exports to force payment. Salesforce publicly stated it would not pay and is notifying affected customers while working with law enforcement. The case shows how data located in integration partners or exports can become leverage even when primary systems are uncompromised. Customers are assessing whether any fields or files could map back to regulated data. What this means: enterprises with deep CRM integrations and partner ecosystems should assume data copies exist beyond primary tenants. For leaders, review contracting language on breach notification, data minimization, and deletion of exports by partners. For defenders, Inventory connected apps, rotate OAuth secrets, and tighten event monitoring around report exports and API bulk queries. Watch for unusual report-to-file jobs, spikes in bulk API usage, and new OAuth grants outside change windows. Recommendation: enforce least privilege access to CRM data and disable unused integrations. If audits will take time, immediately cap export permissions and enable alerts on bulk API thresholds. What happened? British authorities arrested several teenagers in connection with the doxing of families tied to kiddo nurseries, where attackers posted sensitive information online after extortion attempts. Investigators moved quickly, seizing devices and working to remove exposed data from public platforms. The episode underscores the harm from targeting childcare providers and the heightened public safety angle when minors' data is involved. Even partial leaks can trigger long-term safeguarding and regulatory duties for operators. What this means: schools, childcare providers, and small social care organizations with limited budgets are attractive targets due to sensitive data and weaker controls. For leaders, treat data minimization and encryption at rest as non-negotiable and rehearse communications with parents and regulators. For defenders, enforce MFA across admin portals, segregate parent portals from back-office systems, and monitor for mass download patterns. Watch for bulk export attempts from registration tools and creation of new super admin accounts after hours. Recommendation: reduce exposed data and force MFA on all admin access immediately. If full hardening must wait, disable bulk export features and enable anomaly alerts on account privilege changes. What happened? Sportsbook platform DraftKings reported blocking a spike in credential stuffing attempts that abused reused passwords from unrelated breaches. Some accounts showed suspicious activity before additional controls cut off access. The company urged users to reset passwords and enable multi-factor authentication. Credential stuffing is often automated, probing login endpoints with known email password pairs at scale. Financial and gaming platforms are frequent targets due to stored payment methods and cash-out features. What this means: any consumer platform with high-value accounts is vulnerable when customers reuse credentials. For leaders, treat account takeover (ATO) as a product risk, not just a security task. Set friction budgets and integrate with fraud ops. For defenders, deploy risk-based challenges, rotate credential check endpoints, and monitor for anomalous IP velocity and device fingerprints. Watch for login bursts from headless browsers and repeated failures followed by successful logins from new devices. Recommendation: enforce MFA prompts on risky logins and add credential stuffing defenses now. If engineering time is tight, enable breached password checks and throttle by IP or device fingerprint. What happened? A new remote access Trojan for Android is being marketed on criminal forums as fully undetectable, and code has appeared in public GitHub repositories. The malware supports screen capture, keylogging, SMS interception, and remote command execution, and it abuses Android accessibility services to persist and bypass prompts. Threat actors are bundling the RAT into fake utility and messaging apps and distributing them via smishing and side-loaded APKs, Android application packages. Because source code and build scripts circulate openly, copycat variants can emerge quickly with minor rebrands. Mobile endpoint visibility is uneven across bring-your-own-device fleets, giving attackers room to operate. What this means: consumer-heavy businesses and organizations with large contractor populations are most exposed, especially where sideloading isn't blocked and mobile device management (MDM) is optional. For leaders, set a clear policy: no corporate access from unmanaged or rooted devices, and back it with exceptions, timelines, and enforcement. For defenders, require Play Protect and MDM enrollment for access to corporate mail and files, block APK sideloading, and monitor for sudden spikes in OAuth grants from mobile devices. Watch for new accessibility service activations, unknown device enrollments, and repeated login attempts from fresh Android fingerprints. Recommendation: require MDM enrollment for corporate access and block APK sideloading now. If enforcement will take time, gate email and file apps behind device compliance checks and alert on accessibility service abuse. That's the Bare Metal Cyber Daily Brief for October 9th, 2025. For more, visit baremetalcyber.com. You can also subscribe to the newsletter and view the archive of previous headlines at DailyCyber.news. We're back tomorrow.